Welcome to another show of My First Job, the podcast. We've had 26 episodes so far, each a different career trajectory, and today is no different. All of us have our morning cup of coffee, and we choose the brand we like, and we have certain preferences for how we love our coffee or tea. Today's guest is a connoisseur. He's a man with a tremendous amount of experience in managing large tea estates, not just in India, but in Laos and Papua New Guinea. Ramesh Vasudevan has had a wonderful career managing and navigating the entire process of tea making, including tasting. So let's speak to him and find out what happened in this wonderful journey of his. Hi, Ramesh.
Hi, Renu.
Wonderful to have you on the show. And I'm sure that there are so many experiences that you can tell us about that will be completely new to a whole lot of the listeners of the show.
Thank you so much, Renu. Thank you for having me on your show.
Okay, I'm not asking you for the brand, but do you start your morning with a cup of tea?
Actually, I don't. I start with a cup of coffee. I must be honest. And if I fit my first question, it's not right. So actually, I do start with a cup of coffee. But
Okay,
I, I'm equally partial towards both. I do drink
okay,
my tea in the evening, and I
okay,
prefer a good cup of Darjeeling in the evening. And
okay.
I start the day with a good cup of Arabica coffee, which makes it charges the batteries immediately.
Wonderful. Okay. No, the reason I asked is because for most of us, it's just a morning ritual. But for you, it's much more than a ritual. It was part of your career. So, how did it start? Where was how does one get into becoming a tea taster or working in plantations? Can you start from, let's say, college? Because that's the point at which most of us decide how we're going to embark on our careers.
That's correct, Venu. Actually, I had no clue about the existence of plantations per se, and I studied in Ferguson College in Pune, and I was very keen on economics, and the college had a very strong economics department, and I was pursuing my master's in economics at the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics as well, and that's when I visited an estate down in South India, and having come onto the estate, I was taken up with the lifestyle, and I was taken up with
Okay.
the absolute peace, tranquility, and the ability to go to play games in the evening. It seemed just the right style of lifestyle for me. The only other similar lifestyle would have been the services, and I was very keen on joining the services too. In fact, I did join. I written my exam, the Combined Defense Services exams, where I got through the whole thing, but ultimately made a choice and said I would join plantations. So at
Okay.
the age of 20, I joined a company called Malayalam Plantations. It was a British
Okay.
company down south based out of Cochin, and had plantations in Kerala and in Tamil Nadu. That's how
Okay.
I got into planting.
So, what are the first things that you were doing when you join? What happens? What are the jobs that you're, uh, asked to do?
The Yeah, the whole process is was pretty in hindsight pretty uh, to, what shall we say, demanding, because you had to go through a written exam. You had to make sure that there are quite a few guys who are probably keen to get into planting. There was a written exam, and after that, there was an extended interview where we were sent to the plantations. The successful candidates were sent into the plantations to spend a couple of days in the plantations, and you would be observed by the manager of the plantations to see whether you're capable of being a fit for the lifestyle there. So it was virtually, at that time, I'm talking nearly 40 years ago, it was a 360-degree sort of interview where you were observed from all angles to see whether you would be a right fit. So it was your background, is your ability to comprehend the requirements of the job. What you decided was not the only important thing, but also what others thought about you was important. So
Right.
ultimately, if the manager felt that you were capable, you were then given the go ahead and sent back to the company in Cochin, and they would then let you know whether you were successful or not. And being successful, you're posted as a young assistant manager to one of the plantations. I started my career in a state called Mayfield in the Nilgiris. I was
Mm.
fortunate to start my career there. A wonderful estate uh, in the Nilgiris, and I started my career in a tea plantation. It was a tea plantation, and
Okay.
my manager was a no nonsense, hard taskmaster, extremely fair, extremely firm, but extremely fair. And I learned a lot from him because he actually um, showed me how things should be done in a manner that is which have held no biases, but at the same time uh, made sure that you did it the right way, despite the consequences that came your way. And I think that is
So, what
a
uh,
small
kind
lesson.
of, I want to understand as an assistant manager, what would a normal day be like? What would you be doing?
I would start the day, get up around 5:30 in the morning, and by 6, I would be down at what they call the muster. The muster is where the workers of the divisions of the estates would gather, and they would be allotted work.
Okay.
You then went down there and stood along with the staff, the officers who ran the plantations, and allocated work to various workers. And then after that, went down to the factory where manufacture would be on, spend some time in the factory, and then got home for breakfast. After breakfast, you would then uh, uh, well, when once that was over, you would then spend time in the estate of itself and do what was required.
Okay.
It was it was extremely, what shall we say, every minute of the day was busy. You hardly had any time to actually spend on anything else except work. It's a hard day's work, and learning and working together were two was a task by itself. So you had to learn the ropes very fast because the workers were looking at you and saying, "Well, if this young man is going to be the one who's going to be telling me how that work must be done, well, let's see what he knows about it." And there was this instance, there's a practice called pruning, where you prune a tea bush. The bushes in South India are basically in the age of about say 100 to 125 years old, and they're all massive bushes which have been pruned to keep them to the level that they are. And this is a 4-year practice where you prune the bushes. So one of the things that the assistant had to do was to prune these bushes, and
Okay.
you need to do so that you would be able to be able to point out the faults in pruning
The
to the
flaws that, yeah.
flaws that come into it when you went to the field. And I remember I was given a knife and told by the manager, please go and start pruning. And in a matter of 15 days, I would like you to make sure that you know your pruning and you will finish the task. That is a task that we gave. There was, I think, 200 bushes, if I'm not mistaken, was the task
Okay.
that I completed. And I did that, and I finished my pruning, and I was very proud about it. And I asked, the manager came up to me and said, after 15 days, and asked me, have you done the task? I said, yes. He had one look at it, and he called the supervisor over and asked him, what do you think about his pruning? Uh, he looked around, he shuffled, and he looked down. He said, no, be honest. What do you think should be done? He said, if you ask me, I think he should be charge sheeted. So it just made me realize that it's very, very easy to supervise people when you don't have to do the job. It's when you actually have to do the job and when you need to do it well that you realize how difficult it is, how simple the
Right.
job may be. So that was a
Right.
learning that I that it stuck with me for the rest of my life, and I still continue to say that, if you want to ask someone to do a job, make sure that you know how to do it yourself first.
So when you first had your experience of the estate plantation, that was like the trailer, but the main film was quite different from. You
Very,
thought it would
very,
be about play
very
in the
different.
evenings, but you discovered that
Absolutely.
it's a.
Absolutely. The working in a plantation is a totally different aspect altogether. There are so many cultural practices. There are so many things that go into making that simple cup of tea or coffee that we have in the morning. In a tea estate, you have to pluck the tea leaf. You have to put the tea, like I told you, the bushes in South India are probably 120 years old. And you really need to pluck the tea in the right time. You have to make sure that the quality of the green leaf.
Why is that? Why is it that it's asked? They ask, people pluck it early in the mornings, or is there a
No,
time when this?
it, it's plucked throughout the day, but there
Ah,
is a particular interval of time between the plucking of leaf. So every bush has to be plucked every 12 days to make sure,
okay.
10 to 12 days, in order to make sure that the quality of the green leaf is retained. It is there that you have the theoflavins and the theorubins, which actually impart the flavor and the strength of these teas. So it is the duty of the field staff to ensure that the raw material that comes to the factory is of optimum quality. And as a young assistant, your job is mainly in the fact in the field. It's your responsibility to make sure that the leaf reaches is plucked properly, as you do the entire process of making fertilizer application, pest and disease operations, and the other operations, cultural practices that go with it are carried out in a timely manner. And the leaf is harvested and sent to the factory. Once the factory gets the leaf, it then becomes the responsibility of the factory and the staff to make sure that it is manufactured in the style that is required as per the end user. Now, in India, you have two different types of teas. You have the orthodox manufacture and you have the CTC manufacture. The orthodox is what you get, which is basically the older style of manufacture, involves the rolling tables where tea is withered, and there's a process called withering, wherein you remove the surface moisture as well as the moisture from the leaf, and it is brought to an optimum moisture percentage. The leaf is brought to optimum moisture percentage, and then it is rolled. And once it is rolled, it is of this process of oxidation, what they call fermentation, that takes place, and then it is dried. There's a process by using fire dryers. Uh, Now, that is the orthodox way of doing. The CTC is called CTC, stands for crush, tear, and curl. They're basically
Okay.
circular rollers which have got teeth on them, and the leaf is passed through the macerators basically. So you pass the leaf through it, and it macerates the tea, and it comes out the other end. And then there's a similar process of fermentation and drying. Once the fermentation and drying is done, it then goes in for grading and sorting, where you get the different types of grades. You have the leaf grades, and then you get the dust grades. The leaf grades are of lighter liquor, and the dust grades are of a stronger liquor. This is basically it's very basic that I'm talking about. But if you
Right.
go to it in detail, there would be a lot of other nuances which could be
Yeah.
explored. But let's leave that for another day. Uh,
That's the amazing part, I think, of every career. The basics can be learned in about 6 months to a year. The nuances take a lifetime.
Absolutely, Ramesh. That's
So
absolutely right.
there are so many things about. So I just wanted to understand, when you said cultural practices, what exactly were the cultural practices that you had to kind of uh, you know
The cultural practices
honor?
basically would depend, like say the pest and disease practice. Tea is very
Okay.
prone to pests, very prone to
Okay.
pests. You have the sucking pests, and then you have the stem. They have borers, which are pests. So you need to address this by using the right type of pesticides and the right type of fungicides, and in the right dosages and in a timely manner. You need to prune the bush. You need to make sure that the bushes are tipped at a particular height. You need to regulate the shade in the tea estates, because the shade makes a lot of difference in the growth. and the amount of the growth of the tea plant, and as well as the tea leaf is dependent upon the shade. So in
Okay.
South India, for example, we use extensive amount of shade, but in certain other places, shade is not used at all, depending on how close you are to the equator and how far away you are. So
Okay.
all this
Okay.
make a lot of difference, and how so, and also your elevation. So all this makes a difference as far as the type of leaf, and you try to grow. And these are the cultural practices, Venu, that really go into it.
Okay.
Basically,
Okay.
handling of tea.
So you had a lot of walking to do on a daily basis. It was, I
Yes,
can imagine that.
one of the charms of the job was that you were given a Enfield motorcycle. That
Okay.
I didn't realize that the motorcycle was supposed to be parked on the road, and you had to do a lot of walking after that. So yes, there was a lot. There was a lot of there was a lot
Okay.
of walking to be done. The
Yeah.
the bike could be polished and kept, and you walk everywhere. And if God forbid you are caught using the bike for anything else, except for going home, so yes, the motorcycle
Okay.
was there, and it's only later on that you started using the bike to go to various work spots. But then you did actually have to walk a lot. Yes, extensive
Okay.
amount. And
Okay.
I can relate a very hilarious when you talk about walking. It
Right.
was this evening after work. It was around 6 o'clock in the evening, and I still remember the master didn't have electricity, and it is his
Okay.
office. And I just finished the work in the evening. It was dusk, and I was getting back, and the motorcycle wasn't there. But motorcycle was parked at the bungalow because I was told I needed to walk. So I was walking
Okay.
up, and then I take a shortcut through one of the tea fields. I took the shortcut, and I took a bend, and there was a brown bear
Oh God.
having a go at one of the ant hills. I looked at the bear and ran in the opposite direction. The bear looked at me and ran in the opposite directions. We didn't see each other. We hadn't met each other after that, but I'm sure both of us are
Both of
scared witless. Yes,
yeah.
these sort of adventures did come our way. And
Yeah.
I found a leopard cub in one of the fields, and the forest department is not very happy that I was keeping it in the estate, and we had to hand it
Okay.
over. We
Okay.
ultimately did, and I don't know what happened to it. I hope that it survived. There were a lot of
Okay.
panthers, and there were a lot of leopards, a lot of wildlife on these estates at that time. I'm sure it's still there, but at that time it was still pretty wild,
It was a
and
lot more. Okay.
a lot more of that.
Your early schooling and all that, was it in an urban this thing setting? All of
I
it
studied.
or
I studied. Yes, I studied in Loyola in Pune, and
right?
it's basically an urban setting. But my father was
Right.
an instructor at the National Defense Academy at the
Okay.
NDA, and
Okay.
so I was exposed to a lot of the a semi-rural life too at the NDA, because
Okay.
the campus was out there in Karakwasla. Beautiful place to
Right.
grow up. We had the
Right.
best of both worlds, not being in the NDA but living in the NDA, and then
Right.
coming to school. I did my schooling at the National Defense at Loyola and Pune.
No, the reason I ask is that, typically these two worlds are almost, to put it, like a cliche, they're worlds apart. So to get used to life in a plantation, to figure out what this thing is a very different lifestyle from what the urban kids are used to today. So do you find that that is one of the things where is recruitment an issue for today's plantations, or it continues to be just like before? There is a set
You're
of people
so,
who come.
you hit the nail on the head. The life in the plantations is very different. There is a lot of isolation. The ability to live, to work and be isolated from all the lights of the city is something that's very difficult for kids who haven't really experienced this sort of lifestyle. And
Okay.
it becomes even more difficult once you get married, and if your spouse is not used to this sort of life,
Hmm.
and a lot of it does get difficult for the girls, because
Right.
living on the plantations can be extremely lonely for them. I was fortunate
Okay.
because Lakshmi, my wife, was a planter's daughter, and
Okay.
she was able to adjust
She
very
knew
fast.
what the life was like. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, she knew what the life that was about,
Yeah.
and though she
Okay.
often tells me that never ever think that it's an excuse that you can get away with, you know. So I just made sure that I it's always important that we had a break, went out, went back to went to
Yeah.
places that we could see a movie, probably go to a restaurant. All those sort of things are very, very important. So we were
Yeah.
lucky in that way, but there are certain places where it could be
Yeah.
very, very isolated, and especially in the rubber estates, which are far more isolated than the tea estates. The
Okay.
company that I worked with, I started my plantation career, Malayan plantations, basically both tea and rubber plantations. The tea
Okay.
estates were much more closer to town, had much better social life because there were clubs, and one went to the club quite frequently, maybe once a week. Uh, but in the rubber estates, there were no clubs close by, and
Okay.
could get very, very lonely and gloomy. So yes,
So how would
so
you get past? What was your normal? Would you get down to reading? What is it that would happen to spend the time?
100%.
How
A
would?
voracious reader. I read a lot of books, and books were a lifeline. And we went travel miles to borrow books from each other. And
Okay.
one of the biggest things that you could give as a gift to any planter would be a set of books, however old they
Wow.
may be. And often, what planters did is when they left, when they were transferred out, a lot of them left their old books behind in the bungalow itself, so that the incoming guy could read most
Wow.
of those books. And these clubs also had libraries, so it was
Right.
very much it was definitely a lifeline. It was much
Okay.
later that the TV came, and we were able to actually afford a TV. I still remember my first black and white 14-inch TV, um, uh, which
Yeah.
which had very grainy, sort of reception
Pictures. Yeah.
pictures, yes, and
Yeah.
watching the World Cup football without knowing who was scoring what goal, except for the noise that someone was making in the back. I wasn't sure who was scoring
Yeah.
the goal. So
Yeah.
it was that sort of an existence. It was a tough
Okay.
life, but
Hmm.
nevertheless, it had its own charms.
Yeah. No, and at some point, I think it's not that you get used to it, but you discover your ways around it. You discover the compensations. Like you said, for most people, going into a forest would be a break. And for you, getting into an urban environment would be a break. So it's
So true, so true.
it's just like a flip of the whole coin.
So true.
Yeah.
Leave for us,
Yeah.
we look forward to going on leave and not going
Yeah.
anywhere near a hill station or anything of that sort. Be right in the middle of Pune. My parents were in Pune, so we
Right.
would come to Pune and be right there in the middle of town, and seeing
Right.
people. That was a break for us. Yes,
Okay. Okay. Great. So, how long were you at Harrison Malayalam, and what
I,
happened
I,
next?
I was with them for 18 years.
Okay.
I continued to be with them for 18 years. I started as an assistant, and I left as a manager, as a senior manager.
Okay.
My last estate was an estate called Wentworth, which was in the Nilgiris, and I left from there. I was on that estate for almost 7 years,
Okay.
and it had both tea and coffee. And
Okay.
it was one of the prized properties of the company, and I
Okay.
spent a good 7 years there. Um, we had the good fortune of being chosen as the best estate for the best performances, and we were recognized by the company for this effort. And it's all entirely due to the excellent effort of the team that I had. Wonderful
Okay.
bunch of assistant managers and workers who went the extra mile to make sure that we achieved our tasks and we achieved our goals and made the sort of financial targets that were set by the
Targets
company.
that was set.
By the company.
So, how would you handle, let's say, a lot of these people working hard? It's hard labor. There's a lot of work to be done. How do you keep motivational levels high? And do you remember any particular ways points at which you knew that you had to manage situations which had cropped up suddenly?
Yes, Venu, we had to have an incentive system, and we had introduced incentive systems at various levels, right from the worker level to executive level. There were incentive systems that were introduced, and for high performers, there were incentives that were being given. For
Okay.
workers, depending upon the extra number of kilos that they were plucking or picking, there was incentives that were given to them. So yes, you
Okay.
have to incentivize. Otherwise, there is bound to be,
Yeah.
you know, a
Problems.
very
Yeah.
yeah, you would find that the work level standard of work would be extremely ordinary rather than extraordinary. So, in order to
Okay.
get the extraordinary out of people, incentivization is absolutely essential.
Okay. So let's go to your experience in Papua New Guinea and Laos, which I think are were worlds apart from wherever you started in Harrison's Malayalam, new countries, new, and then we'll come to, yeah, we'll, let's take it there.
Yes. So, like I said, I worked with them. I worked in with Harrison's Malayalam Plantations. Then later on, it became Harrison's Malayalam um,
Okay.
till till 2000, and then I left for New Guinea, greener pastures, and there was this company called WR Carpenters. It's at that time considered to be one of the better, or shall we say, top planting companies in the world, and they
Okay.
operated out of New Guinea and in the highlands of New Guinea. And New Guinea is probably the second largest island in the world after Australia,
Okay. Okay.
divided into two parts. One part is the Indonesian part, which is Irinjaya, and the other part is New Guinea. So it's similar people, a country like divided right in the middle by the so-called colonial powers, very similar to what happened between India and Pakistan. A line was drawn
Okay.
and said, okay, this part is Indonesia and this part is New Guinea. So partition actually took place there. So you have this partition that took place. New Guinea is a wonderful country, minerally extremely rich. It has probably one of the biggest deposits of gold, copper. It's got oil and gas. You have every big miner in the world operating in New Guinea. And it also has various, produces fantastic coffee. The high
Hmm.
grown coffees of New Guinea rate at the top coffees in the world.
Okay.
The company that I worked with, Carpenters, at one time, our coffees were rated in the top 10 coffees in the world. And that is a matter of
Okay.
great pride as far as the company went. And the
Okay.
brand that I talk about is called Sigri Coffee. And the cup that I'm holding here is the Sigri Coffee
Okay.
cup.
Okay.
Yeah, well, a lot of memories, good memories that come with it. So yes. So New Guinea was a country that had 800 different languages, 800
Wow.
different and
Okay.
warring tribes
How
that
do people manage to communicate?
had. Well, there were three basic languages
Okay.
uh, that were used in New Guinea. One was Motu, that was used in the coastal areas and the islands. Then you had Pidgin, Tokpisin, as it was called, that was used in the highlands and in the other areas. And then you had English, which is the universal language that's used
Okay.
everywhere else.
Okay.
So I had to learn Pidgin, and I learned it very fast because if you didn't learn Pidgin, you couldn't manage
Your
your people.
workforce. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So and when I joined this company, Carpenters had this very firm policy. You could come from any company in the world, but when you started right at the bottom. You had to start.
Okay.
You had to start from the factory.
Oh,
So
okay.
and they said that Indians in particular had this enormous talent of writing wonderful CVs. You know, so
That's a
so
very backhanded compliment. Yeah.
well, you could take it both ways. So nevertheless, I, the general manager was a tough old Scotsman who
Hmm.
told me that well, if you have to start, the bottom is where you start, and then you rise upwards. You prove yourself,
Okay.
and you could you could head the company someday.
Okay.
Well, I'm happy to say I started at the bottom, but I actually headed the company one day. And
Wonderful.
I ended up as the general manager of WR Carpenters in a matter of 10 years. And I ran the company. I ran WR Carpenters and was
You
happy.
created a harvester there, right? You were not mechanically inclined earlier, but how did that happen?
Yes, that's interesting. This company
Yeah.
was one of the pioneers of mechanical harvesting.
Okay.
Harvesting, as we know, is normally plucked. You find everywhere in the world people plucking tea with their hands, and it was a laborious process. In New Guinea, you didn't have the labor to pluck the tea. You had the tea, you could
Okay.
grow the tea, but you didn't have the labor to pluck the tea. So you had to mechanize it. And the area was flat. So therefore, it lent itself to mechanization. So there was already a process of mechanization that took place, and they had already introduced early harvesters in the beginning. By the time I went there, they were using three-man harvesters, and I was keen on developing something that would be more mechanical, would be track-driven. And I found an old piece of junk lying in one of the workshops in one of the estates, and I set about, actually literally taking the cobwebs off it and pushed it out into the light of day, and then looked at it and found that it was an old wreck that required a lot of work. So I had a good mechanic, a bush mechanic as we call them there, who set about doing something, and we put this whole thing together, mounted an old tractor motor onto it, took the blades of these three-man harvesters, assembled the whole thing. It was a mishmash of all sort of stuff that you could find, put everything together, and tried it out. The first day, the engine actually fired. That was great joy. And then the harvester actually moved. The hydraulics moved. So it worked. So and then the blades worked. Getting the blades to work to synchronize the speeds of the blades, we required pulleys. We got all that going. It was something that was I think
Glorious to
good,
watch.
glorious to watch,
Yeah.
and I felt it was a great achievement. The board
Okay.
was very very appreciative of the effort made, and we tried it out in the field, and it actually ran, much to the pleasure of some of the supporters and much to the displeasure of a lot of others. But it actually ran well. We then decided that we will go for better harvesters because we decided that that is the way forward. And I spent a little bit of time in Japan. Um, my general manager at that time was a South African gentleman who took me along, and we went to Japan, and we spent some time there understanding how the Japanese worked on these. They are the masters of tea harvesting with the Japanese. Japanese have small garden tea estates and are completely mechanized, and they had wonderful machines that worked there. So we went there to learn how they did it and devised a machine that was useful for us. And they understood our requirements, uh, worked with us, and ultimately developed a couple of machines that we've used in New Guinea. They bought the first 5 machines when I was there, and we actually got them working. Um, and it was a pleasure to see these machines work because they cut labor costs by a tremendous amount, increased productivity, and improved quality. So all in all, a win-win for everyone.
For
So it
everyone. Yeah.
yeah, so it was very good. So they got these machines going, and ultimately, uh, by actually fabricating an old harvester, I was able to get these machines back on the estates, and it went a long way in actually mechanizing the whole process. Really.
So that was literally your test run. And then you figured
Absolutely.
out how to, yeah, make
Get
the
onto it
rest
and
work.
do it. Yes.
Okay.
And New
Okay.
Guinea had grew, like I was mentioning before. New Guinea had both tea and coffee, and we had the states which in India, if you look at it, tea and coffee don't grow next to each other. Normally, coffees are in a different region altogether, and tea in a different region. But there, almost every estate that the carpenters had a coffee division and a tea division, and
Okay.
so one learned coffee along with your tea, and that was a great learning experience for me because I didn't have much coffee experience,
Coffee
but I learned
experience.
my
Okay.
coffee from there. and I learned the nuances of growing coffee. Of then later on even tasting coffee. Here in Carpenters, they had the system of a tea tasting session would be held almost every Thursday, and it was there
Okay.
that I really picked up the art of learned how to taste teas, because it is essential that you tasted not only the teas that you made, but you tasted all the teas that others made too. So it was all mannerist
Okay.
tasting get
Can I
together.
just hold you back to, sort of get you into the flow? So when you're making the tea, are different grades of tea made in exactly the same way? How is it that you would assess 10 varieties of tea, for example, or grades?
Yeah, actually, tea. Most the process till your drying is the same, because
Okay.
the grading actually takes place after drying when you sort the tea.
Okay.
Depending upon the size of the granule or the leaves, it is then graded into various types. Like you say, OP, orange pekoe, broken
Okay.
BOP, broken orange pekoe. Then you have FBOP, flowery broken orange pekoe, and so on and
Okay.
so forth. So
Okay.
depending upon the size of the grade, you would then grade the teas accordingly. And the dust grades would be the smallest of the lot. So you had dust
Okay.
grades like Dust One, SFD, Special Fine Dust, things like that. So
Okay.
it is actually the same tea, but broken down depending upon the size of the tea particle that you were able to
And the
grade.
dusties are
Smaller
much
the particle,
stronger.
the smaller the particle, the dusts are much stronger. The leaf grades
Okay.
are more flavors.
Okay. Okay. So, how would you assess what is it that when you drink the tea that is made, how do you manage to differentiate between their minute variations, right? Or are they fairly strong variations?
There are a lot of variations, Venu.
Okay.
In tasting, or there are three processes. What you have to do when you look at a cup of tea, there's one is the appearance
The
of the
color
tea.
of the liquor. Okay.
No, the tea leaf itself. You look at
Oh,
the
okay.
tea.
Okay.
You
Okay.
first look at the appearance of the tea. They twist in the color, the blackish,
Okay.
brownish, the twist in the tea, the amount of tips. You look at the appearance. Then once it is infused, you nose it. Just a minute.
Okay.
This is a infusion cup. Okay,
Okay.
this is a cup. Now
Right.
you infuse your teas in this for tasting, and once you taste it, you smell it,
Smell it. Okay.
you nose it. To see,
Okay.
when you nose it, you're able to get your practice. A practiced nose will be able to detect whether it's been fired, or it's over fired, under fired, whether there's any something different in the make and things like that from your nose itself.
Sorry, what is
So
firing? What does firing mean?
firing means when you're drying your teas, you're firing your teas, you're drying your teas at a temperature of about 120 degrees, right?
Okay.
So 120 to 150 degrees when you fire it. If you overfire it, or then you have burnt. The teas get burnt.
Okay.
So
Okay.
then you will find fire in your teas. You will have a fiery taste in your teas,
Ah.
a
Okay.
burnt
Okay.
taste. So that burnt taste you can get out of when you do this.
Smell
You
it.
smell it.
Knows
So
it.
that is when you nose it. So when you nose it,
Yeah.
you get that straight away. And once that's done, you're able to get an idea as to whether it's been fired. So that itself is an inkling as to what you're going to find in the cup.
Okay.
So the
Okay.
next thing that you do is you take a cup. It's a cup. This is a tasting cup.
Okay.
This is a tasting cup. This is a tasting cup. So your
Okay.
liquor goes into this. So your liquor
Okay.
goes into this, and
Okay.
from here, you taste your teas. You roll the teas in your mouth. Okay.
Okay.
From when during doing this process, what happens is you roll the teas into on your tongue, on both sides of the tongue, and you are able to get the idea of whether the teas possess the qualities they're supposed to have. Basically, is
Okay.
it
Okay.
over fermented? Is it over fired? Is it pleasant? Is it got fruity? What sort of flavor is it? Has got a fragrance which people decide flowery fragrance. There were all sort of terminology that is used in it. But
Right.
basically, that's what it's all about. Basically,
Okay.
you have to have a good nose, you have to have a good tongue
Palette.
and
Yeah.
palate in order to tongue it and to nose it and to tongue it. Very, very important. Your palate is very important. So that's
Okay.
the nuances. So it only comes with practice, and you should be gifted enough to get that idea as to how you can differentiate between one tea to another. And that comes
Right.
with
Right.
hundreds of cups, tasting hundreds of
Hundreds of,
cups.
yeah. Right.
So we should taste
So
these things every week. And I know we should taste our own teas and others' teas also. And if
okay.
you're in the factory, you would be tasting teas day in and day out, you'll be tasting teas to see
Okay.
whether the quality is being retained.
Okay. So typically a tasting session would last for how long? How
A
many
tasting
teas would
session,
you?
it depends on the number of cups that you put out. You would probably have about, say, 50 cups, 40 to 50 cups that put out.
Wow.
Say,
Okay.
10 cups per estate, and some 5 estates, about 50 cups are put out.
Wow.
So, like I said, there are 50 cups like this,
Okay.
which are available, and you would taste each of these cups. And the art is to pick out the best of the lot and the poor ones. And you would say, this is good, this is not good, not that good. And there are certain qualities that you look for. There are autumnal
Okay.
teas. So
Okay.
this is essentially an art that makes a lot of difference because your pricing of the tea depends on these qualities.
Right. Absolutely.
That, so because if you're able to point out a tea that is excellent, the pricing of that tea would be exceptional in the
Okay.
auctions. All these tea go to auctions, and they're auctioned.
Right.
These teas are auctioned. So they have the tasting reports. They're able to understand these are the tasting reports. This is what they say. So naturally, they will be able to find out and say that they're
How
good
would
quality.
blends happen? In the sense that if you were
Yeah.
blending certain types of tea, how is this entire thing managed at the back end?
See, blending is essentially the process that goes into trying to get a mixture of between quality and quantity. See,
Okay.
in tea, what you require is cuppage. For the
Right.
normal tea, the guy who makes tea, the tea shop guys here, on
Yeah.
the chai kada
Right.
shops, as we call, or the tea shops on the roadsides that we have that we see, are all
Right.
dependent maximum number of cups that they can get from one teaspoon of tea. So for
Okay.
them, cuppage is important. Flavor is not important. So strength and
Right.
cuppage is important. Now,
Right.
blending is when you take flavor and you take strength and you blend both of them together to get the
Right.
both best of both of them. So you
Okay.
would find that all the packaged teas, you find the 250-gram packets or 40-gram or 100-gram packets, like you find the red labels and the three roses and these various things that you find are all
Right.
blends. They're all blends of various types of teas that are made.
Okay.
In fact, some of our teas from New Guinea were coming to Cochin for blending. They were coming all the way from New Guinea to South India to blend in some of the blends that were being used by a major tea, probably the biggest tea company in India, because they were
Okay.
wanting that particular color which the New
Okay.
Guinea teas had and the Indian teas didn't have. So
Okay.
all this goes into the blends. The color of the tea, the strength of the tea, the flavor of the tea, the cups that you can get, all that. So all that goes into making a favorable blend. A blend, and they have a very intricate sheet called the blend sheet. So in the blend sheet, the guy who's doing the blend master will write what is the type of tea, how much of that should be blended, and how much should be, and what is the process of blending also that has to be done.
And how would you keep this consistent? Because the crop nature is not something that will give you exactly the same flavor profile each time.
Very true.
Climatic conditions, all of this. So, how do you maintain consistency based on a previous tasting?
That is where quality management comes into being. We try
Okay.
to maintain
Okay.
to the maximum extent there's a consistent quality in the
Okay.
tea. You have to do that. Otherwise, you would find that there's a huge variation that takes place.
Yeah.
However, it is recognized for a fact that in a place like, say, Darjeeling, the first flush, Darjeeling first flush and the second flush, that is, they have three or four types of, they have the first flush, they have the second flush, then they have the autumnal flush, and then they have the monsoon.
Okay.
flush. Now, the first flush and the second flush is where there is maximum demand because the best teas are made, Darjeeling teas are made at that particular time. Whereas in Assam, it is the second flush that is much in demand because that's the best teas that they make. In South
Okay.
India, it, we are fortunate that our both are we don't have those sort of differences that take place. It's more or less we are basically a CTC sort of a
Okay.
segment that we cater
Market.
to,
Yes.
the
Yes.
market that we cater to,
Yeah.
and so we don't have that sort of quality
Right.
demands as in say Darjeeling or maybe Assam. So
Okay.
that's a difference there.
And your own palate in the last 30, 40 years of tasting, what is it that you like and what is it that you intensely dislike?
Well, what I like about it is that tasting a good tea is always a wonderful experience.
Okay.
The In the sense that the flavor that you get out of tasting a good tea or good coffee is something very unique. It's like tasting good wine.
Yeah.
It's something very very different, and you're very appreciative of the fact that you're able to identify from where this tea came from, which of the estates it comes. Each estate
Wow.
tea has a
So to that
different
level
sort
you
of
can make out. Okay.
Yes, it has a different.
Wow.
It has a different sort of a. It has a different sort of a taste. It has a different sort
Okay.
of a character, which is not found in other estates. So you're able to. That's when you are able to say that yes, this is the estate because it's in a high elevation. It produces this sort of a tea, and and you're able to come to some sort of a concrete sort of a judgment on the type of quality that a particular estate produces. That's when you know that you're good enough to qualify as someone who knows something about tea. So that's a good part of tea. The bad part is that you have to go very often get your teeth cleaned because you stain your teeth a lot with the tea tasting.
Oh, okay. That's one thing. Oh, so that's a fairly regular practice to have have your teeth
No,
cleaned.
no, what I'm saying is it stains your teeth.
Okay.
You often what happens is uh, people think that you're a smoker. I used to smoke, but I don't smoke anymore. But when
Okay.
you're tasting, it does stain your teeth.
Oh,
So you do
okay.
have
Okay.
this as an issue. But
Wow.
otherwise, yes.
That was 20 minutes of wonderful education. Ramesh, thank you, because I think it was a wonderful way of understanding what exactly is involved in tasting, because we see it from the outside, but to have an insider view and get to know exactly what went through the process is fascinating. You mentioned briefly that there's a difference between coffee tasting and tea tasting. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, basically coffee. The coffee comes from the two types. The main two types of coffee that we grow are the arabicas and the robustas. And arabicas are basically the higher grown arabicas, and the robustas are grown at lower elevations. Robustas are coffees that basically of which are drunk by people who like a strong cup of coffee without much flavor. Arabicas have more sort of more flavoursome. And in Arabica, you have astringency, you have a better acidity in the Arabicas on your palate as compared to the Robustas. So in coffee tasting, you have to again nosing is a very very important because there's a tendency for the coffee bean to get fermented. It is only in the nose that you're able to actually make out whether there's a hint of fermentation, over fermentation that has taken place in your coffee bean.
Okay.
That could
Okay.
lend a more undesirable taint to the coffee. So that's one of the things that you find in coffee
A
tasting.
couple of questions, Ramesh. I think you can see it.
What's the difference between an Indian chai and green tea? Is the base leaf the same? Well, the base leaf is the same. Indian chai is basically black tea, and what you find in the green tea is actually also the same leaf, but it's a different process of manufacture. Green tea is basically a process where there is direct firing of the leaf after rolling. There is no fermentation process, and it just goes directly either steamed or fired, and the green tea is made. Whereas in Indian chai or black tea, as we know it, there is a process of fermentation and then firing takes place. That's where the difference comes.
Okay, great. And do you have to? sort of clear your palate, or you can just move from one cup to the other? How does it work?
You, we not actually before you start, you clean your palate and then you keep tasting. You don't have to keep.
Okay.
You
You
keep
don't
tasting.
do it intermittently.
No,
Okay. Okay.
independently, no.
Okay, great. So I think from Papua New Guinea, you then moved to Laos, which you said was another amazing experience. So, what do you tell us about that?
Yeah, actually, yes. Laos is a wonderful country. That's it's a landlocked country which has the Mekong River flowing through it, and it's in the neighborhood um of Vietnam and Cambodia, part of the old what they call French Indochina. A small country, a communist. It's currently it is a seclusive communist country where they still almost very similar to North Korea in their functioning,
Okay.
and they are a country that has got have got enormous again a country that's got enormous mineral resources, a country which has got a lot of natural resources, and currently known as the battery of the East because they produce a lot of electricity from
Oh,
hydroelectric plants
okay.
on the Mekong.
Okay.
So I worked with the Birla Group, the Aditya Birla Group in Laos. I was heading a Greenfield project in Laos, which was involved in planting genetically modified eucalyptus in order to raise eucalyptus for extraction of alpha cellulose in order
Okay.
to make pulp. Aditya Birla Group are the world's largest producers of pulp and fiber. That is
Okay.
used in the manufacture of viscose fiber. Which, as you know, viscose is used in shirts and
In
uh,
shirts and yeah.
dress material and stuff like that.
Right.
So they
Right.
were putting out this huge plantation of 50,000 hectares in Laos, and I was they asked me whether I would be interested in heading this project, and I was given the opportunity to do that. And I joined them in and was there for about 3 years with the project. And it was a different experience altogether. Nothing to do with tea or coffee, but that's where I had a great experience as far as forestry went. Laos was the most bombed country in the world. During the Vietnam War, the Ho Chi Minh Trail ran through Laos. The North Vietnamese, the canny North Vietnamese fighters had a trail which ran through North Vietnam. McNamara, who was their Secretary of War that time, had drawn a parallel across the 17th parallel and said, no North Vietnamese will ever cross this. And he had barricaded the whole place, dug trenches, mined the whole place. But yet they found that the North Vietnamese were taking a detour through Laos and coming back into South Vietnam and playing havoc with the Americans as well as the South Vietnamese. So the Americans were bombed the daylight side of Laos,
Laos.
and they did that from various air bases that they had in the island, Russia, and elsewhere. So the amount of armament that they dropped over Laos was huge. And at one time, every 9 minutes, one bombing
Wow.
sortie was going to Laos. So it is
God.
probably it is probably one of the most bombed countries in the world. So once all this was over and 30 years or 40 years down the line, the government of Laos was very keen in getting
Getting fresh investments.
getting fresh investments. And the Aditya Birla Group were keen on finding land to grow their plantations. So they were giving us, this project was started off, and we were involved in finding new land for to plant these plantations. So we had a massive multi-million plant nursery that was put up very close to the Thai border, a place called Savannah, and we were supplying plants to various parts where government of Laos is giving us land. One of the problems that we are finding was that the land that was being given to us was contaminated land. It was contaminated by UXOs, unexploded ordnance.
Oh
Now,
boy.
the ordnance was basically in the form of cluster bomblets. When a cluster bomb is let loose, it releases what they call bomblets. Bomblets. And bomblets are the size of this size, and they fall. There are numerous which are spread all over the place. They may not explode then. A lot of them explode then, but a lot of them explode even later after coming in contact, coming in either animals or human beings, leading to terrible injuries to people and often death to a lot of people. So we were finding that this is one of the major problems that we had, and we had to actually do this clearing of this land in a very cautious manner and had to actually make sure that our people were protected. And we planted out, by the time I left from there, we had planted nearly about 20,000 hectares of land. But subsequently, I'm told that the project the Birlas disinvested and sold the project to some of the Chinese
Okay.
investors. This is what I was told. But nevertheless, Laos was a wonderful country, beautiful place, and worth a visit if at all you ever go that side. There. Wonderful country it is.
Okay. Wow. That's quite a life, Ramesh. How would you? We've almost spent an hour. So what I would like to know is how is it that you have? What is it that you would like to tell young people who want to take the beaten track, or what is it that they need to be prepared for if they're looking for a career in plantations and forestry?
Well, plantations and forestry is very rewarding if you're interested, if you are keen on the outdoors, if you're keen on making sure that you are contributing to the environment. It's an exceedingly rewarding experience to work in the to contribute to making sure that your carbon footprint is being cut down by instead of adding to the carbon footprint that we all do in most
You're
other
reducing
professions, you're reducing it in places like the plantations. And
it.
also you have endless cups of tea and coffee to taste. It's a great experience by it. But
Okay, I
nevertheless,
think the tasting. There's one last question, which the question is there something you are not allowed to eat and drink if you're a tea taster from Pearl to Valley?
well, if you want to be a taster, it's uh, preferred that you don't smoke, and
Okay,
you must have a good palate. So it's
right.
better that if excessive consumption of alcohol also would go a long way
Would
with
affect, yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
So those would be the two. But otherwise, everything else is quite normal.
great. Thank you so much, Ramesh. Any concluding thoughts? Anything that you wish to leave the listeners with?
Well, all I can say is now you know that first cup of coffee or tea that you have in the morning, there's a lot of hard work that goes into it, and there's a lot of experience from a large number of people working on the plantations who go into making
Who
that first
bring
cup
it to you?
of
Yeah,
tea.
yeah.
So, cheers, and
Cheers. Thank you for taking the time. It's been such a wonderful session listening to you and getting to know more of this. Thank you for your time, Ramesh, and thank you for such a vivid illustration of what life is like on a plantation and what is it that you've got to be prepared for if you want to take up a career in this field. Thank you.
my pleasure entirely, Reno. Thank you for having me on your show.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was Ramesh Vasudevan. Another different profession, that of tea tasting, and across countries, and in Laos and in Papua New Guinea, apart from Harrison's Malayalam, which is where he started off. This was another wonderful journey, and we'll bring more such journeys. Please remember to subscribe, and like I said, next time, subscribe now, hit the bell icon, and thank you for to my entire team who's been helping me with this through Deepa and LPS Jayachandran for all the work that they do week after week. Thank you. Until next time.